In continuation of our studies of the various different political ideologies that we're going to be concerning ourselves with, at least the main political ideologies for this series of lessons, what I want to do in this video specifically is talk about conservatism in more detail and specifically focus on the issue of one nation conservatism, a specific type of conservatism that sort of developed out of the sort of mid to late 1800s. As a result of some of the thinkings and some of the thought processes by people such as Benjamin Disraeli. We'll explain in this lesson what one nation conservatism is, what it emphasizes, some of the key issues that are associated with one nation conservatism, how it differs from other variations of conservatism, and just broadly contextualize the nature of one nation conservatism in this conversation, a conversation that will consider a variety of different types of conservatism that we can think about to this day. Now, if we were to just ask the question, what is one nation conservatism? The answer is really a branch of conservative political philosophy with an emphasis on a number of different issues, specifically issues relating to social cohesion, issues relating to the idea of national unity, as well as the importance of addressing the needs of all social classes within a nation. And this is where it gets the name, the idea that a society that is a political society is one that is not distinct from from one part to another. It is all one nation, hence why we get the idea of one nation conservatism. It's an ideology that seeks to bridge the gap between ideas relating to social inequality, to the divisions between the rich and the poor, promoting a form of conservatism that is, at least if we were to frame it more positively, is seen as more inclusive and less divisive. The extent to which that is actually achieved in the actual elucidation of one nation's conservatism is, of course, something that we're going to debate. Now, it is often associated with a more paternalistic approach to governance, so one that sort of views the state and views the people as, in some way, in need of the resources of the state and the help of the state. They are needed in that regard, and so we see a sort of paternalistic approach. The state will play a role in ensuring things like social welfare while still attempting to uphold traditional conservative values. So that's what one nation conservatism sort of is in a broad outline as a political philosophy. Specifically, it originated in the United Kingdom. It originated in sort of Victorian Britain with the 19th century Conservative Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli. Disraeli coined the term one nation, and he coined the term one nation as a way of trying to describe what was conceived of as his vision of a society where you see wealthy and the powerful having the responsibility to care for the less fortunate. He was concerned about the growing divide between the rich and the poor. We know, if you remember, if we were to think about the sort of social context of this period of time, you will note essentially that what this period marked was a period of quite significant division in terms of inequality. This is, of course, caused partly as a result of the Industrial Revolution, where the richest in societies had quite a lot and the poorest in societies had near to nothing. The kind of social inequality that you wouldn't even conceive of, even in today's world, where even in today we have quite a lot of inequality that exists. And so there was a growing perception that this divide between the rich and poor, partially as a result of the Industrial Revolution, will lead to significant social and economic upheaval. And so Disraeli's vision was to essentially respond to this idea, or at least to respond to this trend that was taking place. And this is to respond to the social discontent and to respond to the class divisions that were really becoming increasingly evident as part of Victorian Britain. if these, like I said, if these divisions were not to be addressed, they could lead to social unrest and even potentially revolution. Something that we do actually eventually see at various different stages in the sort of post-Victorian era. One such example of this is the ways in which the Industrial Revolution contributed to the Russian Revolution in 1917. That was a major factor because at least the sort of foundations that permeated society in the Russian Empire as we get to the revolution of 1917 is not just as it pertains to the First World War, but also the general inequality that existed as a result. The Russian state seems to go through a process of modernizing and industrializing at a slightly later rate than the rest of the world, and we see this with the Industrial Revolution and the Russian Empire. And so the idea of industrialization and social inequality as the result of industrialization was something that permeated Russian society as we start to go into the Russian Revolution. So these fears that Disraeli had were not unwarranted. They were not unwarranted. They were not unfounded fears. They were definitely fears that had some significant bite to them. And so as a result of all this, one nation conservatism was designed as a way to preserve the traditional social order by promoting a sense of national unity and, as a result of that, ensuring that the benefits of economic progress would be more widely shared. Let's think about this then. Let's think about some of these ideas in more detail. National unity can be one such example. One nation conservatives emphasize the importance of this idea of national unity and social cohesion. The idea of one nation conservatism is sort of baked into the name, the idea that we're talking about a single community, we're talking about a single national identity, and that is where we get this idea of a single nation. A one-nation conservative would believe that citizens, regardless of their social class, should feel a sense of belonging and loyalty to the nation, and this requires a commitment to social policies that are designed in order to essentially to prevent any kind of inequality and social division. And what is associated with one-nation conservatism is the sort of next logical step to this idea of loyalty to the nation and a sense of belonging to the nation, which is an idea of patriotism and nationalism. It is a central feature, therefore, of one nation conservatism, because we have this belief here as a one nation conservative that a united nation where citizens share common value would be stronger and more sustainable. And in order to really exemplify that, in order to try and exemplify the belief in the united nation, you have to obviously have a sense of belonging and feel a sense of loyalty to the nation. And that's why we see that one nation conservatism does have imbued within it a certain sense of nationalism or patriotism. There's also the understanding that one nation conservatism emphasizes pragmatism over ideology. It's less ideologically rigid than other forms of conservatism, and you might even be remiss into thinking that this isn't really conservatism at all, in the sense that conservatives, when we think about the new right conservatives, when you think about neoliberalism, while they ultimately will claim to, and some of them definitely do, care about inequality and all this kind of stuff, it has not necessarily ever been a significant bedrock feature of that particular political ideology. And so this is something that is also particularly interesting. There is therefore an emphasis on practical solutions to economic problems. And so instead of adhering to basic understandings of ideologically rigid forms of conservative thought, there is more pragmatic views towards conservatism, or at least towards the strict adherence to policy. So rather than suggesting that there should be a strict adherence to free market principles, as a good conservative should do, instead, a one-nation conservative might in fact support government intervention in the economy. And this is if it is necessary to protect jobs or to maintain social harmony. So essentially the key idea of one nation conservatism is this idea of cohesion and social cohesion within the nation. And so In order to achieve that, some One Nation conservatives might let their ideological principles, the sort of ideological conservative principles, fall by the wayside just a little bit. Obviously, a One Nation conservative isn't going to morph into a socialist as a result of trying to achieve this idea of social cohesion, but there might be less strict adherence to basic principles that are considered to be ideologically conservative, for example. There is also the tendency to favour the idea of moderation and gradual change over time rather than radical reforms or even revolutionary reforms. And this obviously ties into the belief that maintaining established social and political orders is important to ensure and to establish and maintain the idea of social cohesion. So to make radical reforms at an immediate point, of course, would sort of disrupt this status quo. Rather, instead, making small reforms, making quite minor reforms that will essentially allow for slight adjustments to ensure maintenance of fair and just society is seen to be more valid, or it's seen to be more practicable. So that's what One Nation conservatism at least was, okay? Obviously, it is mostly associated with the idea of Benjamin Disraeli. In modern times, One Nation conservatism does have quite significant influence in different parts of the conservative parties, specifically the United Kingdom. So leaders like Winston Churchill, Harold Macmillan, and more recently people like David Cameron and Boris Johnson have, while not necessarily endorsed the idea of One Nation conservatism, have nevertheless invoked the rhetoric of One Nation conservatism through their policies and approaches. Conservatives, at least the less populist conservatives, the sort of centre-right conservatives that exist at least in British politics today, tend to be more sensitive to issues relating to inequality and social cohesion than conservatives of the last 40 years or so, or even conservatives in Parliament today that are much further to the right of these individuals. One Nation conservatives will often support the existence, for example, of a welfare state. A lot of conservatives in Parliament today will do the same, although they might argue that some reforms might be necessary to make it more sustainable. They argue that a strong welfare state can help maintain social stability, reduce poverty and inequality. So this idea of the small state, the no intervention, the trickle-down economics, quite hard-line conservative principles isn't necessarily something that is enshrined in a conservative of the sort of centre right to this day. Rather, those kind of ideas remain more towards the ideologically dogmatic conservatives and even the ones that existed 20, 30, 40 years ago. Modern One Nation conservatives may instead focus on education as well as a means to promote social mobility and to ensure that all citizens have the opportunity to succeed.